So, Vince, we're here to discuss Harker
We are.
and the genesis of it, and where the ideas come from, stuff like that.
Right.
Talk to me about where Harker began for you. Where did the idea first come from?
Well, you have to bear in mind that we're going back a long way.
We are going back.
And I struggle to remember what happened last week.
Yes.
Never mind over 10 years ago. But
Yeah.
I have a memory of us coming back from UCAC, I think, on the train and discussing the first issue of Harker. But I assume that that's after the original Griffin Raven series.
Yes.
Now, you probably have a better idea about what Griffin was about because it was your idea.
I do. I mean, talk to me about the Raven anthology. What was your idea about? Because that was the first kind of appearance of Harker.
That's right. Yeah. Well, Raven. It was a self-published comic.
Yeah.
And it came out of that idea that we both had about a good Saturday night's TV.
Yes.
In a comic.
Yes.
So it was going to be a collection of stories that along that theme.
Yeah.
And Griffin was the kind of detective mystery thing. And I think, if I remember rightly, your original idea was that there would be a kind of Fortean element to him, but he was basically the typical loner detective.
Yeah.
Griffin and was Critchley.
Critchley was in it. The original Griffin strip, which was only ever one episode. It was a photo strip, and it was rather poorly done because I did it all. But Critchley was Griffin's assistant, and also looked like Critchley does now. He looked more or less the same.
Yeah, yes, because being a photo strip, we had, because Ian was Griffin, wasn't he?
He was, yes.
Ian was
a
friend of ours at the time, graphic designer, good-looking chap, so we cast him in the lead role.
Yes.
Yeah, and I was the assistant.
Yes, and because the anthology itself, there was like the spy story at the beginning. That was a Sapphire one.
Yes, that's right.
And there was a very early version of Mad Girl in the middle.
Oh yeah.
Which is like the science fiction and fantasy side of it. And Griffin was going to be the TV detective show.
Yes, that's right.
And the original idea I had for it, it was partly composed by myself and my girlfriend at the time, Claire.
Right.
Was the idea of a Fortean detective. So there was going to be fish falling and from the sky and frogs falling and 14 things involved in the investigation.
Right.
So I had that as a rough template, and I had no idea where it was going to go. And all I ever wrote was the first episode, but we did that. And
yes, because I think he didn't Griffin come in to replace the Bishop, which was the original strip.
The Bishop was a terrible strip, a horror one.
Fabulous strip.
It was awful. But yeah, he replaced that.
That's right. So because the issue that Griffin debuted was actually the last issue of Raven.
Yes,
if I remember rightly. So that
was, so take us from that Griffin strip in that last issue of Raven. What did you ask me whether we should do more Harker?
Well, I think because Raven had finished, and we'd just been to a comic convention, so we were all kind of like, oh, well, we're not really doing anything.
Yes.
Let's do a comic.
Yes.
And I always liked the idea of Griffin. I liked the 14 aspect as well, although I don't know why that got dropped. Perhaps we should bring it back at some point. But I like the idea of a detective story in a comic. So I suspect I probably said, well, why don't we do that?
You did.
And I think you were kind of like, oh, that's a good idea. And then I think we started actually plotting it on the train.
Yeah, you did. I remember specifically that you said to me, you know that Griffin strip you did, why don't we do it as a full strip?
Yes.
It was your idea in this to do it as its own comic.
Right.
And I thought, oh no. And but then we changed the name. Can you remember why we changed the name?
I think we changed the name.
You've got worse memory than me.
Yeah, well, it's from recollection. It was because there was a TV series with Kevin Whatley, which was although not a spin-off from Inspector Morse, which we obviously partly based Harker on. I think he was a private investigator of some sort, and he was called Griffin.
Yes.
So I think you said, "Oh, we can't use Griffin then."
No, you said we can't.
Did I?
Yeah.
Oh, was it me?
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay.
You said there's already an Inspector Griffin. We can't do that.
Yes, that's right. Even though he wasn't an inspector.
Yeah.
And there's probably lots of characters called Griffin. Should it be?
It's all right.
Oh. So we changed the name.
Yeah.
And you came up with a new name.
I can't remember where the name Harker came from. There is a pub in town in St Helens Square in York. It's a quite an extravagant bar. It's one of those trendy, like 20 years old bars, and it's called Harker's.
Yes.
And I wonder if I'd seen that maybe a few days before we came up with a new name.
Well, given that at the time you were working over the road in the Guildhall, you probably saw it every time you left work.
Yeah, so it registered in the concert. So maybe that was it.
Maybe.
Yeah. So we started like, what can you remember? Because I can't remember the first initial conversations we had about it, about what we wanted to do there. Because Harker has always been co-plotted by both me and Vince. Talk through the general way that we co-plot, or the general way that we co-create. What's the first thing we do?
Go to the pub.
We go to the pub.
We go to the pub, which obviously we didn't on that occasion because we were on the train.
Yeah.
So it was obviously just a dry run for our normal.
Did you plot on the train?
We actually plotted out the first issue on the train. I think we came up with a rough idea for the story.
Yeah.
And we did the thing where you basically say, well, this is what I want. I think we must have done it very roughly because obviously we were kind of making it up as we went along. Yeah. I think when we got back, you actually kind of created the story in more detail. Yeah. At which point, that's probably when we went to the pub. And you were saying, right, well, on page 1, I want this, page 2, I want this, and then I would make notes and do rough thumbnails and take it back and completely forget what we talked about.
Right. So walk us through the process that we use to create a typical issue. What's the first thing we do?
Well, the first thing we do is go to the pub.
Yes.
Right. Yes. And we basically talk about. Usually, I think you've had a bit of a rough idea. For a plot or an idea.
Yeah.
And so that kind of is a starting point.
Yeah.
And then we just talk through how the plot's going to evolve and what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I'll throw in my ideas. You'll either say, no, that's rubbish, or, oh, that's really good. Because I think, if I remember rightly, for the Book of Solomon, originally it was going to go it was actually going to go more down the kind of black magic path. Yeah, and I think you had this idea that the villain would actually turn out to be some magician who had a certain amount of powers, and I was like, yeah, but that's kind of getting away from the traditional detective story. So why don't we just have it as it being actually to do with sex and the traditional kind of plot sort of reasoning that you get. So you said, oh yeah, that's better, that works. So it kind of so we kind of always, I think we'll always try and do that with Harker, because it's very easy. As you know, comic lovers and fantasy sci-fi fans to let the story get a bit far away from that traditional TV ethos. So I think we'll have to be careful. So we do that. We get the plot kind of pretty much nailed. Yeah. Then you'll go back. We'll leave the pub.
What do you do at the pub? How do we talk it through?
I buy drinks.
Yes.
And then. Well, initially we just talk a load of rubbish, which has nothing to do with the plot or anything to do with Harker for a while.
But you then draw out 20 little.
Well, that's later. You see, now after having worked through the plot and got the plot right, we've usually had enough of it by then. So
enough beer.
Yes. So we'll come back, and then you will just type it all up in detail. Yeah. So you know exactly what the plot in quite a lot of detail. Yeah. Then we'll have another pub session. Yeah. Where you will have your kind of detailed notes. Yeah. And I will get my pen and paper out. Yes. And you will say, right, on page 1, this is what I want to happen.
On page 1, it's an overhead shot of London.
An overhead shot of London. Yes, it's funny how every story, in fact every issue, starts with an overhead shot of London in great detail.
Yeah, you need to establish the story first of all.
Of course you do, yes. Even if it's set in Whitby. Yeah. Apparently you have an overhead shot of London. Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, so when I ignore you and write in, establishing shot, of a park, because I can draw trees easily, then we just take it from there, and I'll either quickly sketch out, just rough thumbnails of what's going on, or if it's a complex scene, I'll just write it out, because we are in the pub and it gets more difficult to draw as time goes on. So I'll just write it out, so I know. in detail what's happening on a page, on a panel by panel basis.
And generally that says I don't even give any visual cues, do I? It's rare. There might be maybe just one panel where I say he needs to be pointing this way for that one, or he needs to be making this.
Yeah,
that's rare, isn't it?
It is, yeah, because I think normally you don't actually think about the dialogue at the plotting. All you have is the plot, and you know what you want to happen scene by scene, even page by page. So in terms of the specific detail of where the characters are looking, who they're pointing out, that doesn't really matter as far as you're concerned at that stage.
I mean, I'll usually say that when you're 4-page scene, and it's I don't know, it's critically questioning a suspect, and so they just need to be talking a lot, and he's questioning, and she's looking nervous, or maybe she's not looking nervous, and you just go for it, don't you?
Well, I'll try and come up with ideas that they never change the plot, because that would be stupid at that stage, but they add detail, and they add hopefully some textures of what's going on, and which you can then interpret at the dialoguing stage, or ignore, but then that when that's done, when I know exactly what's happening panel by panel, I'll then do some slightly more. We'll then come home from the pub again, and I'll do some slightly more detailed storyboards, so I know exactly what's happening in each panel. I'll just do a rough sketch.
How did that 6-page sequence happen? You know, the one it's at the end of the current book 1, the 6-page sequence in the pub, where it's more or less the same background. Can you remember how he decided on doing that? Yeah,
well, that was your idea. You said, let's have 6 pages where it's exactly the same shot. And I remember saying, well, hang on, we can't do that. It was a full page.
You were very resistant to it.
For a full page just with one panel. I was like, and the panel's not going to change except for what they say. I was like, no, that's ridiculous.
It was right at the centre of the graphic novel. And I wanted it to be a moment right in the middle of the story where they discussed it, where you sided with either Critchley or Harker, both had different ideas about what was going on.
Yes.
And I wanted you to side still with Critchley at that point, but for Harker to seed a little bit of doubt in there.
Right.
And I thought the pub was a good place to do it, and I just thought it'd be kind of fun to do an extended sequence of just the same background for 6 pages.
Yeah.
It wasn't even a shortcut, was it? Because you weren't like behind schedule or anything like that.
No, it was no. And in fact, because I felt almost as though, I think partly because I thought I was cheating a bit just to do the same shot, change it up. But I also thought people might think that's why we were doing it, and I didn't want that. Yeah. So even though the background stayed the same, and obviously Harker and Critchley, the characters changed, but I thought, well, I'll also have what's going on with the other characters changed. So there were people in the pub who changed panel to panel, and little kind of.
Because that was a really good example of because we've talked about how when I get your art back, sometimes it changed my idea of what I'm going to put, and the way it had the background characters all moving as well, and doing stuff around them. And you had no idea that wasn't in the plot at all. You just brought it in anyway. Yeah. And I looked at it and thought, ooh, I can do this with that. And I brought in what they were doing into what Harker was speaking, so that Harker's dialogue reflected what the characters foreground and the background are doing or saying at the same time too.
Okay.
So it all kind of links in.
Yeah.
So it made that 6-page sequence much more. What's the word for it? It just made it more dynamic for me because you had the 2 layers of meaning and you really kind of sank into the sequence.
Yeah, that's right. I think which I think is what you need, rather than you being aware as the reader that it's actually just the same. Yeah, it's obviously very unusual in comics to have the same shot in each panel. So you did need the dialogue to bring you into it. But it seemed to go down well, actually.
It's an old Alan Moore trick.
Oh, is it? Oh, right.
Alan Moore uses that a lot, where he'll have something going on in the foreground of some character doing or saying something, and then the dialogue reflects that, even though the character in the foreground isn't anything to do with the story at all.
Oh, right.
So that's where the initial idea for that came from.
Oh, right.
But the content of using it on those 6 pages was entirely the art that you brought back to me.
Right.
Which just worked for that so well.
Oh, right. Well, speaking of Alan Moore, I seem to recall, because there's another scene where they're actually in Although just quickly, I think the other idea of the pub scene was because I think you wanted to establish that Harker likes his beer.
Yeah.
Again, which kind of reminded me of the Morse thing.
Yeah.
He apart from being a bit kind of grumpy like Morse, he likes his beer.
Yes.
So of course, the pub scene was a good way of it developed the characters a bit as well.
Yeah.
With it being fairly early in the story, but there was there's a bit where I think it's a bit later, or maybe it's before, I can't remember now, where they're actually having a chat in the museum, in the British Museum.
He likes his coffee as well.
Yeah, because he likes his coffee, yeah. And Harker stood up against the rail, and he mentions something about his back.
He does, yeah.
And then later on, he actually ends up almost being kind of chucked off about. And you said, oh yeah, is it foreshadowing or something, something, which apparently is an Alan Moore technique as well, which I thought was quite clever. Actually, it actually made it look as though we actually knew what we were doing, and we plotted it out in advance.
Again, sometimes that comes from the hour, because if you hadn't done that scene of him stood against there, I wouldn't have thought of that. So again, that comes from the co-plot angle, where you go away and just draw kind of what you think I probably want. Yeah. And that's when I think, I can use that foreshadowing, because I knew that the climax was going to be in the museum, and so I thought, something can happen right there.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay. Interesting. So so after having storyboarded it, so I know exactly what's happening in each panel. Yeah. I will then get whatever photo reference I need. Yeah. People have noticed that you tend to look a lot like Harker and I look a lot like Critchley.
It's coincidence, obviously.
But obviously coincidence.
Yeah.
But obviously I use us as the main characters. Yeah. Because I think we suit the look of the characters, and obviously I redraw them a bit to suit the actual characters.
You told me once, I don't know if you still do this, but you told me once that sometimes you even use yourself as female characters and just kind of redraw it a bit.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, it's just it depends. Obviously, if I use a photo reference and the photo looks exactly right, then I won't change it. I'll change it very little. But if it doesn't look right, then I'll have to change it. Yeah. So that varies. But obviously, using us, I can kind of pose us and get it roughly right. Yeah. So that's very handy. And I tend to use my mates as support characters, which is also handy. I also did as a bit of it was kind of not so much a joke because it's based on British TV, and I remember my auntie saying, she's an actress, and she said, I remember saying to her, why is it you always see the same actors cropping up in these TV shows? And she says, well, it's kind of like the TV club. The producers and directors just use the same actors. So why? She says, well, it's probably just because they know they can trust them. Yeah.
Would you do that? Would you use the same, if say, the murderer at the end of Book of Solomon, would you use him for another part?
Oh, definitely, yeah. And in fact, all the characters in the Book of Solomon were based on actors that had popped up in either Midsummer Murders or Morse or whatever. And I kind of did that deliberately. And I know somebody did say to me, the chap who runs the satanic cult, is that Larry Lamb? I was like, it is actually, yes, well done. But it just to create that kind of feeling. There's a certain, just that TV thing that this is all seems very familiar.
Do you draw differently with you knowing that it's meant to be a TV show, that it just happens to be a comic as well, but it's kind of meant to be a TV show? Do you draw differently because of that? Do you create the page differently because of that?
In terms of the there's less camera moving around, because obviously moving around is something that I kept getting nagged at by editors when I was just starting out in comics, and people kept saying you've got to move the camera around a lot, more extreme angles and stuff, which keeps the artwork interesting in a comic, but it's not something you see in TV, on TV or film so much. So I'll try and keep. I deliberately won't move the camera around as much. But other than that, no. You've got to tell the story, so I'll just approach it in a fairly traditional way.
Well, when I asked you for a car chase, like there's the brief car chase with Critchley in the police car, not really car chase, that's with the speeding down to go rescue Harker. How do you put something like that? How do you make it feel like it's moving, like everything's fast and dynamic?
Speed lines.
Speed lines.
that's the answer there. Yeah. But I don't know, because that was obviously a very I mean, in terms of storyboarding, it had to move quickly. So, and there wasn't much dialogue, which obviously kept the scene moving.
Yeah.
But it's
because I've been to the British Museum on a bit of a recce. I don't know if it was with you at the time. And I was talking about how I wanted Critch's cart then to smash through the door of the museum and come to a screeching halt at the front of that round thing.
Yeah.
And we discovered it's impossible. I mean, you couldn't smash. No. Apart from not being able to get the car up the steps.
No.
But
or through the door.
Or through the door. The door is the problem because it's massive and it's solid. I can't imagine anything's supposed to do that. But we did.
Yes, solid wooden door. Well, actually,
because you pointed out, you said you can't touch that.
You can't do it. No.
And so I talked about John Woo, didn't I?
Yes.
I said just John Woo it.
Yes.
Just assume that you can.
Yeah.
And then you can.
Yeah, and then you use the reference to John Woo in the dialogue.
Yeah.
But I think the way I did it, because when we were doing that recce and I was taking photos, I realised that actually there are these big, solid, presumably oak wooden doors, and they're massive, but they're not that wide.
No.
And I thought you wouldn't get through there, but at the other side of them, there are actually glass doors.
Yes.
So I thought, well, we'll just have to kind of like suspend disbelief here and assume that for some reason the wooden doors are open. And what he's actually smashing through is the glass doors. Yeah, so it's not. And I noticed that when I was just checking them for the time bomb.
I mean, they wouldn't have been open because the museum was shut.
It was shut, but if you look at if you actually look at the panel where it's smashing through, it actually is glass. That's what it looks like. But obviously, what I didn't really do was establish that there was glass the other side of the door.
Yeah.
So it might be a bit.
And also, nobody would do that. You just park in the corridor.
You would and run through.
Run through. That'd be the sensible thing to do.
It would, but that wouldn't be very dramatic.
Yeah. That was one of the situations where we were wanting to make a TV detective show, but also bring other things into it sometimes, bring other ideas in. So I did. Why can't we make it a big, exciting action finish?
Yeah,
like a big action show. And you were sceptical again of that, where you thought it might spoil it, but it worked. I think. You made it work very well.
Yeah. I think because really it is a comic.
Yeah.
So I think you have to kind of have something a bit dramatic going on.
I think so,
So once the photo referencing and stuff's done, I'll then draw. The first book was drawn. Well, both books were drawn using a pencil on paper to create. I used a pencil to create the artwork, and then the pencils were scanned into the computer, and then the inking was done digitally.
How do you do that?
Well, if the pencil's done very tightly, then often it's just a question of darkening it enough to make it look like it's been inked, and then cleaning it up. But
how did you do it in Photoshop?
It's done in Photoshop with a mouse, and then other parts. If the pencil's not working quite well, I'll just draw it.
And do you ink it in Photoshop as well?
It's just basically inked with the mouse, or darkened to make it work. And then once that's done, because we didn't originally, because it was being released as a monthly comic. It was we had to kind of stick to a monthly schedule, so it had to be quick, but we knew it wasn't going to be colour. So I thought, well, I'll grey tone it, then it'll add some depth to it, that's done in Photoshop as well.
So do you process for the toning change between the Book of Solomon story and the Black Hound, the Whitby story afterwards? Because there's a distinct change in the artwork between issue 6 and issue 7, or in this case, in the Book of Solomon and the start of the Black Hound. The artwork is suddenly cleaner, and the toning is smoother.
Yes. Well, that's simply because what the process was the same. In terms of just using different shades of grey and layering it, but for some reason when I was doing the Book of Solomon, I can't remember why now, but I wanted it to look quite gritty. Whether it was because I wanted a more filmic sort of look, I don't know. But so having done all the grey tones, I then ran. I think actually, what I did was I changed it to a bitmap, which and it added a graininess to the tones. Which at the time I liked, but then when I came to do the second book, I decided I didn't want to do that again.
Did you deliberately wait till the second book before you introduced it?
Well, because having started the first one using this process, I thought, well, I can't stop it now. I mean, it wasn't that I didn't like it. I just changed my mind about wanting to use that process. So for the second book, I just didn't. So all the grey tones are just flat grey. Yeah. But also as we went along, I got quicker, and so I started adding a bit more detail. Yeah. But the grey tonings do work a lot in terms of the backgrounds. They give a lot of depth to the backgrounds, and people seem to like the backgrounds.
I think the artwork does look better in the second book.
I prefer it in the second book.
It's cleaner, it's fresher, and you do actually into it, I think, because you're used to drawing like 20 pages every month. Yeah. Which is unusual, I think, for a small press book or something. Yeah.
I mean, we did well, because not only were we creating the whole thing, just the two of us, but we were self-publishing it as well. Yeah. So when I finished all the drawing, I then had to kind of we would self-distribute. We had to get it printed, send copies off to comic shops, and it was quite a lot of work, which obviously mostly I did.
Yeah, thankfully Steve did that.
Yes, that's right, good old Steve. But so that was interesting. But I think the other thing we worked out as we went along was that if you asked for an overhead shot of London, again, or any
he'd punch me.
Yes, but or any pages or panels where there needed to be a fair bit of background work. Yeah. We would then have 2 or 3 pages where the background work wasn't needed, so I could tone it down and.
Because Whitby's story pretty much starts with a double-page spread of Whitby.
It does. Yes. Thanks for that.
So we've got to establish it's a different place now. So we need a double-page spread. Yes. We're still on.
Yes.
So it's a double-page spread. Just to establish the tone of it. And you look like you had fun with that. You look like you enjoyed it. I don't know if something like that is a huge thing around your neck, a huge
millstone.
Millstone.
No. I mean, it was partly a pleasure because I love Whitby. I mean, I go to Whitby twice a year for the Goth weekend, and
at least
other times. Yeah. Well, well, I know you think it's on every week, but it isn't. But I love Whitby, so it was kind of nice to go there again. We went there. We got some photos, and to be able to draw it was actually nice. It was quite a pleasure. Yeah. But I don't think it was gratuitous. I mean, it was a double-page spread. Yeah. But I think, like you say, because the first book had been set in London, and also traditionally that tends to be where a lot of police shows are set. Yeah. And it's like, so we want people to know this is not London anymore. Yeah. So who's Harker actually based on then?
Well, Harker is kind of me and you together. There's a bit of Columbo in there. He's very much a typical 1980s, 1990s TV cop. Kind of a collection of all of them. There's a lot of me and you in there. So he says things that you've actually said to me word for word. I've jotted down. Oh, that's funny. I'll use that. Oh, so it's kind of autobiographical in some senses. A lot of the things that he's afraid of, a lot of the things that he doesn't like very much, are things that we've talked about or joked about before. Right. That I brought in. There's the owl story about how an owl's been hooting at him all night long.
Oh right.
And that originally came from you.
Oh right.
Because you had a problem with an owl, didn't you?
Yes, he used to wake. Yeah, it was when we were at Flavering Grove. He used to wake me up. Yeah. Every night.
Apparently.
Sod.
Hoop. I remember you say hoop, bloody hoot it went. Yeah. And I just gave that line to Harker because it fit him so well. So if we were casting Harker for a TV show, who would you want to play Harker?
Well, I know who you want. Yeah. Peter Capaldi.
Peter Capaldi is Harker.
Yeah. But I don't know, actually. I mean, he would... I know when you first said that, I thought, oh, no, but then I said the same thing.
He's Scottish.
Well,
which is a bit of a problem, obviously.
Well, Harker could be Scottish.
He could be Scottish.
But I said the same thing when you said you wanted Peter Capaldi to play the Doctor. Yes. And I was like, oh, no, that would be dreadful. Yeah. And it wasn't. So, so perhaps he would work. He does have the right kind of... grumpy demeanour. Yes. Which I think would work. Yes. So who would you have as Critchley?
I don't know.
Tom Cruise.
I've got no idea.
He's a bit old for the part now,
Yeah.
isn't he?
Yeah, Chris is in his thirties. Again, Chris is a combination of both of us to an extent. He's more you. Harker's more me than you, and Chris is more you than me. But both of us are still in there. But I think I said before that everybody loves Chris. He's really nice, and they all like him, and he's very popular, which is very much you. And like everybody hates Harker. And nobody talks to him, and he keeps himself to himself because that's me.
Well, not exactly.
Not exactly, but kind of gelled down to a thing. But I think Capaldi could do it very well.
Yeah.
But Chris, I don't know.
But the characters are obviously designed to be opposites. You know,
Yes.
Chris is always very upbeat and positive.
Yes.
And Harker's just very downbeat and grumpy.
Yeah.
So
It kind of reflects the characters in a way. Harker's very old-fashioned.
yeah.
So he speaks and talks and even looks very shabby, like an old-fashioned cop. You'd imagine an old-fashioned cop probably would do.
Yeah.
Whereas Chris is a smart, newer cop. He knows his stuff, so he wears a suit and he looks impressive and has his phone and everything's always right, touch his fingertips.
Yeah. And a flashy smart car.
Yeah.
And like rather than an old banger.
Yeah, he's got the smart car and Harker's got the old banger. Again, all these things, little kind of subtle things, just kind of suggest the character. Although you chose the cars, didn't you?
Yeah, well, yeah. I think we were looking for.
I remember when we first did Griffin, I had this idea that Harker would drive those cars with the wooden frames.
The old Morris Minor things.
The old Morris Minor things.
Right, yeah.
I think I said Morris, and Morris stuck with it because it's still a Morris, isn't it?
It is, yeah. But to be honest, I think it's more that we were out. I don't know why we were there. We were at the Vintage Car Museum.
Yeah.
Out in Thornton the Dale.
Yeah.
And there was a Morris. Yeah, there was a Morris, an old Morris there. And I just thought, well, that's got the kind of. It's a bit like Morse.
Yeah.
Who drives around in his old whatever it is.
Yeah.
I'm not a car enthusiast, so I can't remember what it was, but I thought it looked kind of like it was that sort of thing, but without it being flashy and nice the way Morse's is. And I thought that suited Harker as well.
Yeah.
He wouldn't be able to afford a nice car, but he'd still have an old vintage car.
Yeah.
It's
so that was beaten up and shabby.
Exactly, yeah. So that was kind of handy. And so I took some photographs of that. And then in the car park down the road was an Audi TT, and I'd never seen one before. And I was like, "Oh my god, that's amazing! Look at that! That'll do for Critchley."
Yeah. You didn't wander around it.
I took loads of photos, and I was kind of cooing over it. And I remember there was a woman there watching me. She said, "You really like that car, don't you?" I was like, "Well, I am actually taking photos as reference, but I do really like it." Yeah. Which probably demonstrates I'm not really a car enthusiast, because most people probably think, well, it's just an Audi TT. Yeah. It's nothing.
I wouldn't even know what sort of car it was. It's a blue car.
No, it isn't.
Well, it
was silver, but
was it silver originally?
The one I took, but blue's quite a popular colour for the Audi TTs. I know that's why Andrew made it in the when he's been colouring the Book of Solomon.
Because Steve wanted Harker's car to be white, didn't he?
He did, yeah. Harker's car was supposed to be green. But only because the original one that I photographed was green. So Steve wanted it to be white. So but it was a bit of a shock when they kind of came back coloured, and I was like, hang on, he's got a white car. That's not right. And Critchley's is blue.
And I just thought, why is it matter? They're just cars.
Yes, well, exactly. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But so going back to you'd want Capaldi to play the character.
Yeah.
But how would you feel about him bringing his own interpretation?
Oh,
would he introduce some things that?
Well, yeah. I mean, a TV version of Harker would be very different than the comic version.
Yes, I suppose
it just would be.
Yeah.
And it would become his. I think you just have to live with that, really.
Yeah.
You have to live with changes once it turns into something else.
Yeah, whichever actor you put in it. Yeah. But obviously the
broadcast Critchley's a woman.
Yeah, they might.
It's a woman.
Well, that wouldn't be right at all, would it?
But
it would be funny seeing Harker's reaction to being assigned to a woman.
Yeah.
But obviously, so we've got there's the two books. I mean, it's a bit confusing because obviously we originally because it was a 12-issue run.
Yeah.
And the first 6 issues was the Book of Solomon, and
Yeah.
the second 6 issues was the Black Hound,
Yeah.
or the Woman in Black, as it was called then.
Yeah.
So there were, and then those were both collected as 2 books. But now Time Bomb are reissuing it.
There'll be 4 books.
They're splitting it into each one into 2, so
Yeah.
there'll be 4 books.
Yeah.
So there will in fact be a book 5,
Yes.
which will be a new one.
Yes.
Now, what's your thoughts on the story?
That's going to be in Port Merion.
Paul Merrion.
Murder
Right.
Amongst Spies.
Oh right, okay.
It's an idea that Nick's from Colombo,
Oh right.
who has a very similar story with Patrick McGowan in it.
Oh right.
And I always liked it.
Yeah.
I always liked that Patrick McGowan was in it because Patrick McGowan was the murderer 4 times
Oh
in
right.
Colombo.
Yeah.
But
Did he
yeah.
direct one of the 2 of them?
Yeah,
as
he
well,
did,
didn't
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
I
So in the
think
spy
he
one,
wrote
was he actually the character from The Prisoner?
No, but he was similar to him.
Right.
He said we're seeing you
Oh right. Yeah.
at one point, I think, and there was something else. I can't remember what it was. There were a couple of little references in there.
Yeah.
And I've always liked that episode. So
Oh right.
So doing Murder Amongst Spies, set in Port Merion, might have an underground base, might not, I don't know. And
Right.
there'll be some James Bond in there and stuff. We're trying to bring in different ideas with each subsequent story, and the one after that is probably going to be New York to bring different ideas again. So you've always got Harker and Quitchy as the constants in the middle of it, but around them everything else changes.
Right.
In
Yeah.
the same way that the Columbos did,
Yes, that's right.
So you've always got different environment, you've always got different characters
Right.
to freshen it up, to keep it alive.
That's right. Yeah. But obviously that kind of obviously there's a changing location. Because I think the original idea was to actually have them roaming the country looking for murders, so that they didn't get bogged down in one place.
Yeah.
Because I don't think you like that kind of trope about them always, the environment being as much a part of the story. I don't think, and then the house burning down.
Yeah.
too much soap opera.
Yes. Yeah.
So we're getting away from that. But so New York. But that's obviously then. Why did you think of New York? 'Cause that's obviously not their stomping ground.
You always got Miss Marple goes to Paris, or Columbo goes to London, or Macmillan and wife go to, I don't know, Vienna or whatever.
Skegness.
And they're always rubbish. They're always terrible episodes.
Yeah.
And so they showed lots of the places that went to, but the murders were just an average one. So I wanted to work with that and make it funny and make it exciting. So the idea is that we're going to go against the typical trope and try and make a Harker goes to New York to be fun.
Right. Okay.
So whether that works or not will remain to be seen.
Yeah. Right.
That's the German idea that we have for what will be book 7 and 8.
Yes.
With Time Bomb.
Right. Yeah.
But that's still to come, of course.
Yes.
But I think that's enough for the moment.
Right. Okay then.
We'll talk more about the Whitby one maybe next time.
Yeah.
But thank you, Vince.
And thank you, Roger.
Hurrah.